Welcome to the People by People podcast with me, your host, Laura Sutherland. Today I come to you with an additional episode of the podcast. I have just finished a session at the PRCA's International Virtual Summit where I was in conversation with Dr. Martin Valenti, who is a former client of mine, and he's head of climate enterprise and COP26 at Scottish Enterprise. And we were given an opportunity to have a discussion and do some questions at the PRCA Summit around climate change and the climate crisis and the opportunity around that. And I just thought I would take the opportunity to do a recap because it was such a great conversation. We got really great engagement at the event. I think that our messages were really quite clear. And then coming off that and looking at Twitter and the conversations on there, it was fantastic. So just to give you some perspective, as I said, Martin used to be a client of mine when I handled the PR and communication for Scotland's 2020 climate group. I recently reconnected with Martin when I joined the PRCA's initiative around the climate crisis and misinformation. John Brown, Corai, David Gallagher, Simon Francis, Tila Clayton, Rob Morbin from ICCO and me have formed a group where we are basically doing research around misinformation, the climate crisis in our own industry and the public, which we've been doing, and we partnered with Opinium on that. We now have the results of that, which we will be releasing at some point in time. But the whole conversation today at the PRCA's Virtual Summit was, in my opinion, was encapsulated in a few words. Firstly, educate. PR and communication professionals need to be educated around misinformation, around disinformation, around how it's spread, how to spot it, how to be ethical and approach it in your own way, in your own practice. We need to be informed about how we are advising our boards or advising our clients, and we need to also be positive in the way that we approach this, particularly around negative, conversations or what is deemed as negative. For example, the climate crisis. So I just thought I would quickly go over some of the questions and answers that Martin and I talked about to give you some perspective, because it's fresh in my mind and I really kind of feel that it's a great way to just kind of come off the backstage and straight onto recording a podcast for you. So the first one was, and yes, I should have probably asked Martin to join me right now, but anyway, we are where we are, as they say. With the rapid increase in growth of issues being discussed on social media and the sharing of opinions hardly screened, how do you determine a crisis versus an opinion being voiced? And the simple fact is that you can't beat data and you can't beat facts. And at the moment, science is producing the facts and the data around the impact of what is happening to the world. And that also includes, people, planet versus nature, the economy, and all that type of conversation. Another thing that John Brown did his misinformation presentation right before Martin and I did our discussion, and he used the word alarmism. And I think that's one of the, apart from either denial or getting angry about a discussion, alarmism is another one, basically raising the alarm, and rather than doing it in a proactive way to say, here's the problem and here's a solution, don't be alarmism, because that just is the wrong way to approach stuff. But nicely summarised as intent versus action. So you might have good intentions, but your actions have to speak volumes, and once you start to act, that's when change starts to happen. The other thing I was asking Martin about was his thinking, because he obviously is in Scottish Enterprise and works a lot with businesses, and has more of a sort of a scope as to what's happening elsewhere in the country. Does he think that the COVID recovery will have weakened the opportunity to progress the climate agenda as we had originally thought? And he said, no, it's actually given us more of an opportunity more of an opportunity to prepare, more of an opportunity to reevaluate, and actually coming back to a lot of what I've talked about since last March. So for the last year, it's about reimagining the opportunity for businesses and organizations. You're having to re-strategize, you're having to rethink your frameworks and your business models and your staffing. And culturally, we've had a big year as well, where there's a lot happened. Black Lives Matters movement hit. Racism has been something that not only have people been talking about, but hopefully taking action about. And again, it comes back to intent versus action. And now we have an opportunity to really rethink our businesses and organizations to ensure that we are making them fit for purpose, we are making them fit for stakeholders, and that there is resilience there from every point of view, and diversification of thinking, skills, experience, age, sex, race, sexual orientation, everything, like be diverse. And I think this is a way that you can have better collaborations, and collaboration was the next part of what I believe is one of the biggest ways that we can potentially sort of help solve a climate crisis. But moving on to the next question, I'll come back to that in a minute. I'd asked Martin about the Greta effect, and if that was maybe why some organisations were too scared to talk in a positive way about their actions and what they were achieving in terms of CO2 and carbon emissions. Because they don't want mocked, when people are talking about stuff like that, and they don't also want to be singled out either for shouting, about their own successes. So what was that sort of, what was that opportunity? And what's the opportunity, like what's the appetite from the general public for these positive stories? Consumers are surely more climate conscious nowadays than they ever have been before. And I think that's the thing, like Martin kind of said, don't be that activist who just stands and shouts and is the shouty person. You only get noticed for so long with that type of approach. So yeah, I think that the change to positive, the positive approach to get people excited, to get people inspired and fired up in the right way is also an important thing. And that comes at the start of the education process as to what the challenge is and how we're going to go about it. I was wanting to talk a little bit about behavioural science because I think that there are barriers to people understanding and changing their habits relating to climate change. And before you can launch any sort of campaign or anything like that in PR communication, we need to know what those barriers are. So from a mindset perspective, is it a fear of change? Or is it because some people deem climate emergency as somebody else's problem to deal with? But other areas that I've identified in relation to behaviour and climate change were sort of appealing to someone's moral sense of duty, as we have today in our talk for the PRCA. We reinforce social norms and shared values, incentives, rewards and sanctions, social beings and shared identity in groups and communities, and also big decisions, the capacity of the human race to put the long-term needs of the many above the short-term needs of the few, which I think is a really important consideration that people should be putting at the top of their agenda, essentially, to set the scene. Then we talked about the opportunity for growing the economy at the same time as cutting emissions, and we looked at Scotland as a case study. We have a lot of peatland in Scotland. We also have wind, we have rain. We are perfectly situated, and Martin reeled off some stats there about Scotland compared to other parts of Europe and the world, but we're perfectly situated and with the perfect sort of natural I suppose ecosystem around us to actually drive change and have a much bigger impact. And that's why we were able to not only meet, but we actually smashed the 2020 targets of 42%. And that was something that I worked on with Martin back in those days. And then we came on to, we kind of missed a couple of questions, but then we came on to the one piece of advice he would give to PR professionals, and he was talking about basically, get on and do it, be positive about it, change the narrative. And I think I would add to that we need to do it ethically, we need to be transparent, we need to understand. So again, coming back to that education, but also energizing leadership. That is one of our responsibilities to really go there and get leaders excited about what those opportunities are in the right way and make them feel part of that solution as well. And then obviously consider how we would handle the negativity and those who don't fully understand, and because you will come up against that. So be armed, I suppose, for responding to anything, and also the future, the sustainable future of improvement. Not just improve now like a boom and bust, but how do you do it and how do you get longevity out of it? Anyway, that is me, a really quick summary in 10 minutes or so of the PRC Virtual Summit. I hope that you took something from that. I hope the PRC shares some of the content after the event. Check out PRCA TV on YouTube if you haven't already. There's some great content on there, which is used as a hub for storing all their video content. But if you've got any questions for me around climate crisis or communication around that, then please do get in touch. You can find me in the usual channels, and I'll also add my contact details as usual to the show notes. But enjoy the rest of your week. I'm going to put this live just now, so it's going to be hot off the press. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please do subscribe, leave a review of what you thought about the episode and the show, and I'll be back very soon with another interview.